Welcome to Sword and Shield, the official podcast of the 960th Cyberspace Wing. Join us for insight, knowledge, mentorship, and some fun as we discuss relevant topics in and around our wing. Please understand that the views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the views of the U.S. Air Force nor the Air Force Reserve, and no endorsement of any particular person or business is ever intended.
Welcome to the Sword and Shield podcast. I'm Colonel Rick Erredge, 960th Cyberspace Wing Commander, and today we have a very special guest. We're really excited to have the 21st Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General David L. Goldfein. Sir, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Rick, thanks. Thanks for having me, and big shout out to all your great troops.
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate it. We've had some interactions in the past, and it's good to see you again. And really happy to have you part of the team and to share your thoughts with us as you've reflected, post military career, and then of course you're a very busy guy right now in continuous engagement. So what are you up to these days? And I know this is going to happen after we publish the recording, but congratulations on getting the Order of the Sword here this week in San Antonio. So that's a huge honor. We're really excited for you to have that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's the greatest honor that will ever be bestowed, and I'm very humbled by it. So since I retired, I'll tell you that across the Air Force, part of our culture, and many different organizations, we get call signs or nicknames. I got a new one when I retired. I go now by JD, and that stands for just Dave. I don't go by general. I don't go by chief. I just go by just Dave. It fits pretty nicely, unless you're my grandchildren. And then, of course, I go by Papa. But it's been a great transition, actually. And this chapter for me is about solving big problems with people I really like. And so far, the portfolio I've put together is all involved in doing those kinds of things. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I know we've been trying to plan this for a while, so I really appreciate your persistence in scheduling and hanging with us, as my schedule has been a little bit crazy these days as well. And so I know when you were rotating out, the world's much different now than it was at the retirement ceremony. I remember watching it online and thinking, man, I wonder what the next chief's going to have to deal with as far as crisis and what's that going to look like. And little did we know that we are right into some things that we have never experienced before in our Air Force. So any thoughts as you kind of think about as that transition happened for you and as the next chief took over?
I think the only real legacy we leave behind as leaders, this will be the same for you, Rick, as wing commander. The only real legacy that you leave behind are the folks that you raise to replace you. It's the investment you make in talent. It's the recognition of people who've got what it takes to step into your shoes. And so I will tell you that I'll start off by saying I couldn't be prouder of General Brown and the current team that's in place and how they've been handling themselves in helping to lead as part of the joint team. Between Russian activity in Ukraine, activity in the South China Sea, difficult times in our country in terms of the divisiveness that we're seeing. These are all really, really huge challenges, but not one is above the capability and capacity of the current team that's in place. So I'm Chief Brown's loudest cheerleader.
Yeah, that's excellent. I appreciate that too. So as I was reflecting yesterday, coming to the end of my tour, at some point, I don't know when that is, but thinking about the most important role I have as a wing commander, and that is just what you said, to make sure people are ready to replace me, and every leader is grooming and developing the next person to take their job. I think that's what makes us great. Even as reservists, we have opportunities to build this team and bring in airmen with they're bringing civilian experiences into the business, grow them, take a different direction. We're really thin. A lot of people are doing one-offs, the only person to do their job. And so I'm really proud of the team we have and how we go about our business and making sure that the next generation is ready to go. And as you think about that next generation and where you are, I'm interested to know, looking back at Second Lieutenant Goldfein, what kind of thoughts, if you had a chance to go back and talk to yourself as Second Lieutenant graduating the Air Force Academy, what would you tell yourself, and what kind of thoughts would you give yourself?
I think I had a great experience as chief. I went out to Lackland and was sitting with some young basics before they even became airmen. And this young woman was sitting across the table from me, and she was looking at my stars, on my OCPs, and she says, "Hey, sir, I got a question." She said, "How do I get some of those?" And I said, "Well,"
I'll ask that question.
I said, "Well, being selected from literally hundreds of your fellow basics to sit and have lunch with the chief is probably not a bad start, because it indicates that I know how this works. You weren't randomly selected. I'm sure you were selected because you're doing really well here." And so my first, piece of advice to you, if you're looking for, to rise to senior leadership, is be really good at whatever we ask you to do. Be the very best at whatever it is that task you're given, because that initial reputation will carry you for, throughout your career. And, as I've talked to, groups and senior officers as well, I think there's a maturity process we all go through that shifts from what I call, postcard to greeting card. So most of us, at least when I was young, a second lieutenant, all the way through really probably about major, lieutenant colonel, I looked at the world through a postcard, right? Which is, it was time for an assignment. I grabbed the postcard, I looked at the scene, had palm trees, beach, folks having a good time. And I looked at that scene, and the question I asked was, does that look good on me? And that's how I think most of us look at our careers in the early stages, right? Is that scene a good fit for me? And I think you get to a point in your career, perhaps about the squadron commander time, where, at least for me, I shifted my thinking from postcard to greeting card, right? There was no picture on the greeting card, there was just a saying. And you open it up and the card said, what can you contribute to this scene? It's a big difference in the question. No longer what looks good on me, but how do I contribute to this scene, regardless of what it looks like? Because in that scene are people that require inspirational leaders who can inspire them to do more together than they can ever do individually. They can become part of a team. They can have great culture. And once you actually mature from postcard to a greeting card, then any scene looks equally great. And you're no longer so worried about this one particular path, because this career and this life is a journey. It's actually not a destination. And there is no one path to the top. You can go look at all the 22 chiefs. You can look at the chief master sergeants of the Air Force. There's not one career that looks close. So if you look at it as a journey, and you can make that shift earlier than I did, perhaps from postcard to greeting card, it's going to be a very rewarding journey along the way.
Yeah, I know when I took squadron command over, I was very focused tactically, and I know I had a hard time going from thinking tactically to thinking strategically. And I was a reservist. I was a full-time reservist, and then a part-time reservist, and then back to full-time, and a lot of stuff going on in my life. And I found myself ill-equipped when I went to SDE in residence, and I didn't want to go in residence. I already had my Royal College by correspondence done, but I knew I needed it. Like I needed that. I don't want to call it rebluing, but I needed that move from tactical to strategic. And it was an amazing experience. And as reservists, sometimes with all their busy lives, it's hard to get people to make that commitment, just because whether it's a money thing or whether it's family. any advice you have for people looking for those development opportunities when they know they need it, or maybe even more important, how do they know when they need it? Maybe they don't see it, and then what we can do to help push them. Certainly, if we see potential in them, to be a leader at whether it's squadron, group, wing, staff, wherever they are. Any thoughts on how you approached when you kind of see somebody and you want to push them?
Back probably in our parents' day, you could graduate from college and ride a bachelor's degree for a 30-year career in some company, and you could rise in an organization, and it was sort of the entry, into a career. I don't think that's true anymore. I think that today, a bachelor's degree is actually the launching point for a life of continuous learning and continuous growth. And when I would interview officers and NCOs for key leadership positions, the more senior position I was looking at, the more important to me was the potential for future growth, as opposed to what they had done previously to qualify them for the position. And especially the senior leaders, one of the things I really looked hard to try to find out was, does this person feel like they've arrived? Have they planted a flag on a mountaintop, and they know what they need to know? They know how they do business. They know themselves. And the problem with that approach is, if it's a senior position, guess what? Everything we put on their desk is going to be hard. And if we put something on their desk that's really easy, quite frankly, they're doing somebody else's job, right? As a wing commander, Rick, right? There's not much that hits your desk that's easy. And if it is, quite frankly, somebody's wasting your time, and you're doing something, it's the old do, delegate, delete, right?
Yes,
do only what you can do, delegate everything else, and then the third piece, select all, delete, is just good for the soul, right? And so, if one wants to remain competitive in the reserves, the Air Force, the military, you name it, then there has to be a commitment to lifelong learning and growth. I grew it a lot in 4 years as chief. I completely flipped my position on the Space Force. Started off, quite resistant, because I was really concerned about the joint and operational integration we'd achieved with space, that we would lose that as we separated space into a separate service. But then I listened, I learned, I read, I spoke, I did my own individual research, and quite frankly, my own individual growth, to come to the conclusion that the president got it exactly right, and then got full-throated behind it, for the remainder of my time as chief, to help set it up for success. So I would just say to everyone, be wary of feeling like you've arrived. If you are entering a new position and you're a little bit, I don't know if scared is the right word, but I'm talking about, right? There's a little bit of fear there. If you're a little bit uncertain, if you're wondering whether you're up for the challenge, if you have all of those uncertainties as you grab the guidon, guess what? You're in great company, and you probably got it about right. If you're standing there completely confident that you've got this completely wired, and you know everything there is to know about the organization you're about to take responsibility for, danger, Will Robinson. You're going to have. There's a lot of things around you that are happening that you're just not going to see, because your blinders are right there.
Well, that's great, because I've felt that in just about every key job I've had, has felt unprepared and really anxious and concerned about my ability to perform and compete and do the right things. And so it's great to hear that other people have that same way. We got to find a way to talk about that with the leaders, to say that's okay to feel that way. And then that opens you up for that growth that you talked about. And so I
Well,
know.
you can share with your folks that if they're feeling that, they're in great company. The former chief felt like that.
Yes, sir. I'm using it. I'm going to quote it at next commander's call. And so going into this job, I felt that week we spent with you and the rest of the staff directorates and everybody getting us ready for wing command. I was the vice at the time. So I'd been the vice for about 6 months at the time. And just kind of at 6 month point was just kind of getting comfortable with the organization. And of course, as I rolled in August of that year and then took command, I was like, wow, I thought I knew what my boss was doing, but and again, I felt ill-equipped and unprepared. So were there any things when you took wing command that you took away from that experience that helped you grow into the chief, or just lessons that specifically to share if people want to be a wing commander someday, to make sure that they're kind of ready to pursue that?
Wing command is in some ways it's the first level of command where you're put in charge of things you have no idea, have no background in, right? For me, for example, I was operational fighter pilot. Operations group command was actually not that different than squadron command. It was just a little bit larger of what I already done. Wing command, now when I'm responsible for installation, roads and grounds, and water treatment facility, that's something I just never grew up understanding, right?
Yes, sir.
So it becomes all about gifts and gaps. What are your gifts? What are the things that you know about? And most importantly, what are your gaps? What are the things that you just don't know about at all? And you got to be comfortable enough in your own skin to be able to actually show a little bit of vulnerability as a leader to your folks and say, hey, listen, I have no idea what goes into what you're doing. Can you teach me? Can you show me, what's going on with this? And you have to realize, I think, that there are things going on in the organization that you just can't see because they weren't part of your background, right? So you and I have very similar, probably in many ways, life experiences growing up. Every room we've ever went into has been full of people that look just like you and me.
Yes, sir.
Right? White males. The vast majority of the organization are filled with people like us. The systems in place for competitive promotion were built by people like us, for people like us. And so because you and I have never been the only woman in a room who has been scrutinized to a completely different level, who've had things said to us that others think may be funny, but are actually quite degrading. You and I have never been the only African-American in the room. You and I have never been the only, I could fill in the blank, right? That's not been you and I, Rick, that's not been our common life experience. And it doesn't mean that we're evil. It just means that we have blinders. There are things going on in the organization we just can't see. We'll never see them. They weren't part of our life experience. So it's important for us to understand our gaps. And our gaps are that we can't see these things unless we surround ourselves with people who can fill them in for us. And that goes to the teams that we select, the folks that we bring into our inner circle, and who we rely on to help us make the best decisions. And if we surround ourselves, especially at wing command, but at all levels of command, if we surround ourselves with people who have had the same life experiences, we're going to find ourselves at the bottom of the cliff, all arm in arm, singing Kumbaya, having no idea what just happened to us.
Yes, sir. That's a great point. I feel more comfortable now with, I feel like our airmen, certainly it's not perfect and we need to continue to always do better, but routinely I have people, when I have mentoring sessions, bring things to me that they might not have been comfortable with talking about before. And I just had one a couple of days ago during our unit training assembly over the weekend. I was having a mentoring session with somebody that said, did you know? And I was like, oh my God, what I just said was, that's not what he said. I know that's not what you meant, but here's my experience. And I was like, wow. So even when I think I'm as open and really try to listen, I still have those opportunities to learn and grow. So, and I think as I've grown up, obviously I grew up in southern Minnesota, where it's very much like me everywhere, and didn't have any experiences. I went to college in northern Minnesota the same way. And so I experienced some things from a perspective that people put labels on me as well that I didn't know, that I even understood. And so I've tried to break those as I've grown. And my leadership style has kind of morphed as I've grown. And I think I've become more tolerant and open to those things. I used to get really frustrated. I had some experiences in Alabama where some of my classmates, we couldn't go to lunch together at the same place. And this is 1994, because they're African American, and they said they won't go to lunch at this place because of is just unwelcoming to them. And it blew my mind as a second lieutenant that this was happening even in 1994, 95. So I've taken those experiences in the wing command and tried to create a culture where people, that we can talk about that, and that we're able to share and be more comfortable with confronting those things. And so I guess the next thought for you is, as you've grown through your leadership positions, has your position or approach to leadership changed, or have you always kind of been who you are and you've just become more self-aware of your leadership style, or have you made some 90-degree turns in how you approach certain things as you grew up?
Yeah, I think the core has probably always been there. What I think we all try to aspire to be is inspirational servant leaders that understand and accept that leadership is a gift that's offered by those we're privileged to serve as leaders. And it's a gift that we have to earn and re-earn every day. And it's lost in a second of indiscretion. And if we understand that, then we can also, I think, understand that culturally as a service, we rally around our the most essential element of command, which I've always believed and still believe is squadron command. And it's the commander that sets the culture. When I was chief and I'd do my circulation and I met airmen, I always had two questions. Question number one was, tell me your story. Because as my predecessor, Mark Welsh, used to tell us, every airman has a story. So I used to love listening to, hey, tell me your story. What brought you in? And then somewhere in that description, they would almost always mention the unit they were in. And I would wait till that point and then follow up with my second question, which was, well, tell me what it means to be a bulldog or a jaguar, or what carnivorous animal was their, mascot. And it's an important question, because I wasn't asking them, what do they do? How do they do it? What do they do it with? Be that, cyber, flying, you name it. I was asking them a deeper question, which is culture. What does it mean to be a bulldog? And I know what we want to hear. We'd love to hear, I'm part of something really special, where I'm valued, both individually and as part of this team. And the people to my right and to my left are my brothers and sisters that I'd take a bullet for, if I had to. And together we're doing something so important that it's much bigger than anything I could do individually. And I'm proud to be a bulldog, right? That's certainly what you want to hear. Well, how do you get that answer? Because it's from the heart, right? I'm not asking them to recite something. It's, well, guess what? It's built by the commander and the senior NCO, the senior leadership team of that organization. And then you can hack the clock. It hasn't changed since the beginning we became a service. 6 weeks after a young commander takes the guidon, she imprints her personality on that unit, and the culture is defined by her. And so what does it mean to be a bulldog? What does it mean to be part of your wing? That's an important question. And I think we spend every day trying to get the right answer by re-earning the gift of leadership from those we're privileged to serve.
Yeah, that's awesome, sir. I know I've heard other leaders that approach, and clearly they probably learned that for you and other leaders before us. And so I always find it interesting when we put an airman in front of a GO for a briefing, or we have a lot of intel folks. We do a lot of cyber intel stuff, and we put our youngest airmen who are in 5-level upgrade training in front of GOs. And at the end of it, they always do a wonderful job. and they're never prepared for the question of tell me your story. They're more prepared for technical, tactical things. And so I see this transformation, and then we bring them in to mentor the next Intel airman that's going to brief. And what do they always tell them? Hey, at the end, you need to be ready to talk about what your story is and who you are and what it means to be in the wing and stuff. So that's naturally happened all the time. So I really appreciate you kind of pushing that. And so as we get to the end here, there's one thing that's been really kind of burning at me. And I always ask this question. I asked when General Hawk was here, as he was on his way out at 16th Air Force headed to Cybercom, I asked him some questions about that he couldn't answer, was unwilling. So I'll give you that alibi as well if you don't want to answer this question. But maybe generically you can, like, what do you think is the most important thing that you whispered in General Brown's ear as you were transitioning out and he was getting ready to take the flag?
Yeah. I told him, hey, I'm going to be the best predecessor you've ever had. Because I had a great predecessor. And there's a way that you transition an organization that, again, it's that postcard versus greeting card, right? It's about the institution. I needed to create an environment 6 months out when we now knew that he was going to be my successor. We needed to create an environment where people could get excited about the new chief in my presence, because I was excited about the new chief. And that 6 months out, I essentially stopped hiring new members of his team without talking to him. Got to be very careful because, and before, in our system, rightfully so, before you're confirmed by the United States Senate, you cannot take any action. But it doesn't say that you cannot prepare. And so my job was to help prepare him for the position. And look at his background. Here's a guy who was the CFAC, was the work in UCOM, was the deputy commander for Central Command, was the PACAF commander. There is no one in the United States military, let alone the Air Force, that has more operational combat experience in every AOR across the world than General C.Q. Brown. So my task was easy. I always believe, and this is something for all of you who are thinking about your succession plan, the first 30 days of your successor's tour, that success is actually your responsibility as the outgoing commander. After 30 days, it's on them. But that first 30 days, it's on you. What are you doing to prepare the organization for a smooth, successful transition? And what are you doing to make sure that they can get excited about the new boss in your presence? And I used to say that, you do command in quarters, right? Quarter or quadrants, if you will, right? And you get 4 quadrants, no matter how long you get, right? 1 year, 2 years, doesn't matter, yes, right? I had 4 years as chief. And the first quadrant is about establishing your vision. You don't actually have to come in on day one and have it all figured out. Remember our previous discussion, right? You got to grow. Sometimes it's really important for you to take in what your senior NCOs and others are telling you and incorporate that in your vision. You get a full quadrant to do that. Quadrant number 2 is about communicating that vision and putting the procedures, plans, the people in place, the environment required to establish, to achieve your vision. Quadrant number 3 is execution. It is drive, and make sure, because you're going to get most of your work done in quadrant 3. And guess what quadrant 4 is? It's about preparing for your successor. And you sort of walk around the organization with 2 bottles on your hip. You got one that's got a fertilizer and one that's got Roundup. And you're squirting fertilizer on the seeds that you planted that actually took root and are doing pretty well. And you are flooding the bad ideas that you started that just get rot with Roundup to kill them. Because if they didn't succeed on your watch, guess what? Get rid of them before your successor has to kill them on his or her watch, right? And if you approach a command tour with those 4 quadrants in mind, I think you're going to be very successful. And again, I'll leave it with just and never forget that leadership's a gift. It's a gift that's offered by those you're privileged to serve as a servant leader, and you got to earn that gift every day that you're in command.
That's excellent. So I really appreciate that. I've never thought about it that way in quadrants before, but it does make a lot of sense. And as I think with my strategic planner, we talk about, hey, we kind of naturally talk about, hey, what do we want to get done this 6 months, this year? And we've never put it like in framework as firm as that. So that's excellent. That's what I'm taking away. Hey, I really appreciate your time, sir. We're going to let you go. I know you got a busy schedule, and thanks for joining the pod and talking to our gladiators. Really excited about what your future and what you're doing, supporting the Air Force and continuing to be, a public figure afterwards and being a great grandpa too. So I know that's really important to you. And thanks again for your time. And I'll leave you with any final words to send us off.
Just a shout out to all the families out there. Especially our spouses. They exhibit a very special kind of courage when they endure long hours, deployments, separations, and sometimes what we don't talk enough about, which is a little bit of loneliness that goes along with military service. So thanks to them for what they do, and to all of our great reservists out there. Really proud to have served with you.
Excellent, sir. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.